The last time we talked in this very spot, we embarked on a very difficult subject, namely Henry James's characterization.
Well, we started off with culture, if you remember, and we moved on we started talking about the characters a bit.
Yes,
towards the end.
But we had a slight disagreement because you claimed that Henry James's characters are artificial. They're constructed with some ulterior purpose in mind, whereas Dickens's characters are alive and spontaneous and walk off the page.
Well, I felt that Dickens's strength was his characterization, whereas Henry James was more the kind of pacing of his novels, which I think are nicely thought out, compared with Dickens, who kind of splurges all over the place. And I think you got really memorable characters in Dickens.
You know that G.K. Chesterton, in his preface to Dombey and Son, says that Dickens started to go wrong at that point because he became too careful of the plot at the expense of the vitality of the characters.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
there you go. You see, great minds think alike.
But now, coming back to our friend Henry James, there's many things to be said about this. James used models for his characters, for many of them. And one of the industries in James is finding out who the models are.
Right.
And the characters are usually composites. So there might be one principal model, but other minor models. I was looking at a novel that I have to say was one of the most boring, and I haven't got to the end yet, one of the most boring I've ever read, which is The Tragic Muse by Henry James. The main character is a fellow called Nick Dormer. And Dormer, the name itself sends you to sleep, right?
Yes, doesn't it? Yeah.
He is torn between being an MP and being an artist. Neither of them convincing at all. Neither of them convincing at all as characterizations.
Right.
But the novel is realistic. It's extremely pedestrian. It's like Trollope in the sense that it's very close to real life. But when Trollope is close to real life, there's a tang and a spring in his step. But when James tries to be very close to real life, the effect is rather pedestrian. There's only one living character in the novel, in my opinion, and that's a fellow called Gabriel Nash, who is modelled on Oscar Wilde. And in fact, Oscar Wilde walks off the page in the few sections in which he appears. He's a kind of, what would you call him, a sort of evil genius or a mischievous elf who is persuading Dormer to abandon the life of the MP and take up the life of the painter. And of course there's all sorts of sexual and aesthetic undertones which James is very good at planting whenever he wants to. In contrast to that novel, that's this Trollopian novel, is the previous one, which is this Dickensian novel, The Princess Casamassima, chock-a-block with very nicely done characters. There's the Cockney girl, she's perfect. There's all sorts of other characters, most of whom have real-life models. It should be alive and great fun, but it's not. It's a very intricate plot, but somehow it weighs heavily on you as you read it. So there is a problem between James and his characters. However, all of James's weaknesses can become his strengths at a certain time. There's an article in the Henry James Review, which I just got a copy of the other day. I forget the author's name, but it's about Kate Croy in The Wings of the Dove. I was going to recommend her to you as a wonderfully living and vital character. She's a villainess, but she has our sympathy to a large extent. However, this article has ruined my belief in Kate Croy.
Why is that?
The author says that Kate Croy is not characterized at all. She just comes across as a cold, manipulating woman, and her impact on the other characters is strong. But who is Kate Croy? She's hardly characterized at all. So this kind of threw me back. But let me read the opening lines of The Wings of the Dove, which impress on you her character so powerfully that it kind of remains alive for the rest of the novel. She's talking to her father, and her father is a totally wretched man, a kind of a disgraced character. And he wants her to make money, to become rich. And she realizes if she doesn't do that, she will live in total abject, ghastly, lower-class suburban life like her sister with her numerous family. So she's desperate to escape. Now just listen to the opening sentences. She waited, Kate Croy, for her father to come in, but he kept her unconscionably. And there were moments at which she showed herself in the glass over the mantel, a face positively pale with the irritation that had brought her to the point of going away without sight of him. It was at this point, however, that she remained, changing her place, moving from the shabby sofa to the armchair upholstered in a glazed cloth that gave at once, she had tried it, the sense of the slippery and of the sticky. She had looked at the sallow prints on the walls and at the lonely magazine, a year old, that combined with a small lamp in coloured glass and a knitted white centrepiece wanting in freshness to enhance the effect of the purplish cloth on the principal table. She had above all from time to time taken a brief stand on the small balcony to which the pair of long windows gave access. The vulgar little street in this view offered scant relief from the vulgar little room, and so on. She's irritated, she's trapped, she's boiling with a kind of passion.
I can see how the word vulgar there, it's a vulgar little whatever it might be. But the focus is, I mean, sure, she's perceiving that, but also we are seeing her sort of objectively in the room, aren't we?
Yes,
we're seeing the environment.
Yes.
And there's a lot of description of the environment, with only kind of that sort of meagre little hint, in a way, that she thinks it's all vulgar, and her feelings, I suppose, about her father, and that it's there. It's there in the same kind of very competent and understated way that you get in Jane Austen.
Oh, that's very high praise.
It is, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to go there and say that it's got that degree of understated proficiency about it.
The concrete physical details are well used, the furnishings of this room. The novel he wrote after that, which is the Golden Bowl, Edith Wharton, who was a great friend of his, but was also a highly critical person, she said to him, "But James, in the Golden Bowl, the characters have no bodies, they have no environment, they're pure spirits. Why did you characterize them in this way?" And he said, "I didn't know I had." Now, that's the way she tells it, but I doubt very much if that's fair. It's true that they're much more mental characters than physical, but I'm not sure.
They're psychological constructs to a certain extent, aren't they? And thing is, though, that we make the mistake of thinking that writers know what they're doing.
If they knew fully what they were doing, they wouldn't be great writers.
They probably, yes, exactly. I mean, that's what something like Jane Eyre. Okay, I mean, it's like if she had known the insensitivities, the prejudices, the narrow-minded bigotry that comes across in her novel.
Really?
But that's part of what makes it a wonderful novel.
Yes,
but she's a very much an English woman of her times, very parochial.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I mean, Adele's French, for God's sake. Well, we have to have to get the educate her out of that for a start. Bertha's Jamaican. I mean, lock her up in the bloody attic.
I see.
If she'd known what she was doing, she wouldn't have written the book.
And that's the problem with political correctness. I mean, it kills the goose that lays the golden egg by trying to correct its manners.
Well, it's good that she could splurge in that kind of way, and the same with her sister in Wuthering Heights. That I mean, she gives all that destructive power to Heathcliff, and she relishes in it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then, like, somewhere through, halfway through the novel, it's almost like she does come to realise, and she sort of says, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Well, the guy's he's going to have to pay for it now. She can't really let him get away with it. But she does, to a certain extent, realise that she's relished the destructive power of her anti-hero.
Well, James relishes the destructive power of Kate Croy. And he sympathises with her at the start anyway. She waited, Kate Croy. That's a hawk waiting for its prey. And it's also somebody who's waiting in a condition of suspense. It has to be resolved somehow or other. So you realise then her manipulative, nasty plot has a human basis which gives it oomph and power. Whereas F.R. Leavis, who wrote a very critical essay on James, but a very sharp one, it's one of the best things ever written on James. It's on all of James. Mm-hmm. An overview of James. It's chapter 2 of his famous thing, The Great Tradition.
Great Tradition, yeah.
I don't think literature critics are allowed to do that today. They can't just sit down and write what I think of Henry James and assess his entire work. But he does. And he thinks that the heroine of The Wings of the Dove, Millie, is a complete blob, is kind of almost not a character at all. She's just an idea. She's just the rich American girl.
Right.
I think that's possibly a little unfair too. But in any case, the question is also about feeling in Henry James. Sometimes his novels are criticised for lacking any emotional warmth. And I would think that there's a fair amount of truth in that criticism of some of his novels. The one novel that's ever popular is The Portrait of a Lady. And I think that novel has got a swing and a suspense and an élan to it and a high suspense quality that still attracts people a lot. Now, in characterization, as I said, he always has models. But of course, sometimes he very much conceals the models.
Should we read this one?
Don't read that bit there, please. No, that's a secret. That's a secret.
Okay.
Shh.
Oh.
This is the model for the princess. For Christine,
you're going to publish this one.
For Christina Light, or the Princess Casamassima. She is the heroine of one of James's earliest novels, Roderick Hudson and the Princess Casamassima. She's the heroine of both of those novels. She's modelled on a very famous person whose photograph is on the wall, but I won't show
whose identity is not yet to be revealed.
I haven't yet published the article proving beyond doubt to my mind that she is the model. And there have been many other suggestions.
Watch this space.
Yes. James lies between the Victorian novel and modernism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when he began, he wanted to write great 3-volume Victorian novels and have a popular audience. And you can see that he failed in that. The Princess Casamassima and the Tragic Muse, which I mentioned earlier, published in 1887 and 1890, were both commercial failures and critical failures. And then he turned to the theatre with even more disastrous results. And when he came back to the novel about 5 years later, he's writing these kind of svelte, slim, artistically shaped novels.
Yeah.
Because the novel industry was dividing into two at that time: the popular audience and the artistic audience,
right.
The elite audience, the aesthetes of that time. And James threw in his lot with the latter. He realised that he couldn't become.
Well, that ties in with his essentially snobbish nature, doesn't it? Or am I being a bit cruel?
Not exactly snobbish, but he always regarded writing primarily as an art, right? And he always felt that other novelists lacked the sense of form. You see,
which other novelists?
Perfectionism.
Yeah,
every other novelist, be it Tolstoy, be it George Eliot, they're all accused of lacking form and lacking a sense. Whereas the only novelist who had a sense of form was Flaubert.
Right.
Because he's also a Francophile, and
yeah.
Even though he lived in London, because London was where life was. You know, in Paris he was just a foreigner, an expatriate, but in London he had access to a whole social world, which gave him plenty of material.
What would he have made of? Do we know what he made of? Someone like Thomas Hardy, or even you said before he might have known Sherlock Holmes. He might have known
Conan Doyle.
Yes.
I can't remember him ever writing about Hardy. Now I can easily check if you give me a second.
Sure. He'll be right back.
This is the Library of America edition of all his. There's 2 volumes. One is his European, his essays on European writers. He's talking about Bathsheba. She is a young lady of the inconsequential, willful, meddlesome type, which has lately become so much the fashion for heroines, the type which aims at giving one a very intimate sense of a young lady's womanishness. But Mr. Hardy's embodiment of it seems to us to lack reality. He puts her through the paces, but she remains alternately vague and coarse, and seems always artificial. This is Mr. Hardy's trouble. He rarely gets beyond ambitious artifice, the mechanical simulation of heat and depth and wisdom that are absent. Well, now, that's exactly the criticism.
It's the sort of thing you were saying.
James, yes.
Well, it's interesting. Yes, partly it fits in with what I was saying about James.
Yes.
But also it fits in with what you were saying, that he doesn't like anybody, does he?
Well, as I said, he likes
except Flaubert.
He likes Flaubert. But even then,
how did he feel about Flaubert's parrot?
His essay on Flaubert is actually very critical as well. He says Emma Bovary is stupid and therefore she's not a suitable character for the story.
Yeah.
And likewise, the hero of L'Éducation Sentimentale, Flaubert's second great novel, is an unworthy vehicle for the novel. So it's funny, he attacks the protagonist of both of these novels.
Right.
He admires their art, but he thinks that the protagonist is deficient because Flaubert himself, according to him, was deficient in humanity.
Is this because he's a perfectionist?
Of course, an extreme perfectionist.
He is, isn't he? But
usually,
is there also a side to it where it's kind of like detracting from others to make himself seem as if he shines more brightly? Or am I being cynical?
I don't think so. I think it's genuine perfectionism, and he's aiming at perfection. Now, usually perfectionists are sterile. I mean, Flaubert was a perfectionist, and that made him rather sterile.
Yeah.
But Henry James, whenever he started writing something, he always finished it. He thought it was bad luck to leave something unfinished. So he was a perfectionist, but he was a professional at the same time.
Right. Does he criticize his own work?
Oh, immensely, yes. I mean,
so he's as hard on himself as he is on all these other writers?
I would think so. Well, sometimes he compliments himself. The prefaces are the famous prefaces to the New York edition. There's a whole volume, and they make up a book on their own. It's published separately as The Art of Fiction. But The Tragic News, for example, which I just panned a while ago, he goes out of his way to praise it, and you can feel he's rather desperate that this novel would not have been a total flop, and he's propping it up by every means. But with the other novels, he's very critical. He can be very critical of his own. In a technical way, not in a.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Then he holds the bar up high.
He holds the bar very high. He's a model in many ways.
Yeah. Good.
But we were saying just before that, we were talking about Thomas Hardy. I don't remember the novel Far from the Madding Crowd, but it certainly wouldn't be true of Hardy's other female characters. I mean,
Tess is as real as you can get.
Sue Brightside in Judy Obscure.
Yeah.
I mean, these are fabulous creations. So sometimes James, in his criticism, because you write these things in a few hours, for money. So he sometimes is rather devastatingly dismissive. Walt Whitman, he reviews Walt Whitman's poems, and he points out that Walt Whitman doesn't know how to rhyme, his meter is all wrong. I mean, all the wrong criteria, very French criteria being applied.
Right.
And then at the end of his life, he became an admirer of Whitman and used to recite him sonorously, and claimed that he was a great genius. So this is also part of James's return to America, his recovery of his Americanness, which he had rather rejected.
Yeah.
I mean, America was a tragic country. When he was young, it was the Civil War. 600,000 people died. I mean, we can't understand what a trauma that was for that nation.
Okay, Whitman sort of come onto his radar
very late in life. Yeah.
Would Eliot?
George Eliot.
T.S. No.
I think it's impossible. Well, he died in 1916.
Eliot
would have been around a little bit before then.
No, but scarcely.
But Henry James came hugely onto Eliot's radar. How could he not? The same went through the same process as himself.
Exactly.
Francophile, who becomes a faux Englishman and a snob and a literary perfectionist and a critic.
And a kind of, part-time American.
And a critic who looks down on everybody. I mean, at least Henry James did not go so far as to say that Hamlet is an artistic failure, that Milton wrote English as a dead language and has a disastrously bad influence on English literature, and so on and so forth.
Yes, that's certainly going for the jugular and bringing down the giants, or trying to.